All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. We are live streaming, correct, as we go? So we are live. So we have people joining us remotely, and we want to thank you for being here. My name is Michelle Casabula. I'm the superintendent here in Oak Harbor Public Schools, and I have the great honor to work with all of these people. So they get to put up with me, actually. But we're excited to be here tonight because many of you, since I came here 8 months ago, had lots of questions about school safety. And I think as parents, when we flip on the news and we hear stories across the country and in our own community, as parents, we have that first guttural reaction about, are my kids safe? And so that is why we are here tonight. We believe strongly in listening to voices and concerns in our community because all of us in this room are responsible for the well-being and safety of our children. So when we send our kids to school, we want to make sure that they're safe and they're cared for, and we're not only developing good humans, but we're also keeping them safe emotionally, academically, and physically. So we are here tonight to help to be part of the solution as a community and answer questions and learn from you, and you learn from us, and we learn together on behalf of our students here in the community. So I'm going to give you a little overview of what the night is going to be about. We had a lot of questions that we had online. So many of you had submitted questions, but we also have index cards, and I have two assistants in the back, Lisa and Katie, and they'll be grabbing index cards. If you filled one out and it's a new question that arises as we're going through the first part of this session, which is the presentation, then feel free to write that down and then just hand it, wave it up in the air, and Katie and Lisa will get it to you. I'll collate and theme it because many of you might have the same question, and then make sure if our presentation didn't cover it tonight, that we spend time at the end to make sure all of your questions are answered. So we also have live questions being submitted as we go too. So we'll collate those and address them as we go through the presentation. So before we begin, I want to honor time tonight. So I'm going to be a timekeeper. So if you get long-winded, panelists, I'm going to cut you off. I might just stand over and tell you, you're done. And then we'll get to it later. So if you do have questions that extend beyond that, or you feel like it's a one-to-one conversation, all of these people are available. You can reach out to them in an email or phone call, or later tonight we can exchange contact information. And if your question didn't get answered and you feel like it's more of a one-on-one conversation, you want to have a one-on-one personal conversation about it, we're going to make sure that we set up that time for you. So we want to honor our time tonight and our time of our panelists. So we're going to get started by having each one of you introduce who you are and your position. So we'll start with Sarah Foy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Foy, and I am the Communications Officer for Oak Harbor Public Schools.
Dwight Lundstrom, Assistant Superintendent for Oak Harbor Public Schools.
Tyler Sarkovich, the Director of Information Services.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Hunt. I'm the Director of Facilities for Oak Harbor Public Schools.
Hi, I'm Kevin Dresker. I'm the Chief of Police for the Oak Harbor Police Department. Thanks for coming tonight.
Hi, I'm Nate Salisbury. I'm the principal at Oak Harbor High School.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tony Slowick. I'm the operations captain with the Oak Harbor Police Department.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Russ Peters. I am interim principal at North Whidbey Middle School.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Bailey. I'm the administrative captain with the Oak Harbor Police Department.
All right, thank you. So here's our agenda for the evening. I'm going to really make sure I keep monitoring the clock, so I'm not really like eyeing you, Russ. I'm just going to look above you to make sure we get the time going here. So a couple things here on the agenda tonight. We have put together most of this presentation based on questions we already were receiving. So our presentation is geared toward questions that we've had that created this event tonight, as well as while we were putting together a presentation and reviewing it with all of our panelists individually, as questions kept coming, we made sure we were able to set up our presentation tonight to be able to encompass your questions or concerns, or those that we received since the beginning of this year as we've been talking about safety. So we're going to go through that. We're also going to talk about our components of what safety is in our district. What does it mean in a district, as well as what does it mean with our partnership with our local law enforcement? And then as a community safety, what does that look like? And that's anywhere from when we get an incident and we respond, what's the start, middle of the process, and finish to the process, and then how we debrief after each event with our local law enforcement in our district team. We're also going to talk about the parent role. Many of you had expressed some concerns and how you can help. We're going to address that. And the thing missing tonight is student voice. So we have been meeting with students at schools. We met at Ojai, we met at the high school, and we have 2 meetings set up. Home Connections, we have a meeting set up for, as well as we have a meeting for our middle school coming up. And so when we listen to student voice, we ask generic broad questions about safety. And in fact, we asked some of our students about mental health safety, SRO safety, and our kids freely speak to us about that. So student voice is very important to us. And it's unfortunate we didn't have time tonight to have a student panel, but perhaps that's some of our next work that we set out to do. So that is our presentation tonight. I'm hoping, so for my panelists looking at time, 6:35, we can finish our presentation. So if you can just kind of monitor your clocks and time as we go through the presentation, and then we'll have 20 minutes to get to any further information that's needed in this presentation. So let's begin. It's going to click here. So these are our components when we think about safety and security. It's just not physical safety, it's structure safety, it's communication safety, and it's emotional well-being safety when we think about safety planning. So we have different components that we're going to walk through tonight. And we notice that these arrows, it's not all said and done. We do one thing and we're done with it. It's cyclical. We always keep coming back to all these components to student safety. So to start with tonight, we're going to talk about prevention. And our biggest thing that we know when it comes to safety is just being able to have an avenue for our students to go to an adult that they feel is someone they can trust, and have a confidential aspect to that where they can say something if something's on their mind, something that's concerning them around physical safety. And when I'm talking about safety, it's emotional safety, physical safety, structural safety, something that happened in the community. So when we think about prevention, our best way to deal with any event that happens in our community is prevention first. And so we really make sure that we are putting together safe school communications on websites, schools' Chromebooks, so students all have an avenue to submit confidential information if they feel that there's something bothering them. They don't have to come to the office and report it, so you're not that kid that shows up to the office. So we have different avenues, and we continue to work with students to figure out the best way for a see something, say something. We also have a lot of state laws, and you can find all of this information on our website. We have some laws that really kind of restrict us in some things that we can do. And I know when I was in high school, things looked very different. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lundstrom to talk a little bit about some of the mental health support systems that we have already in our school system.
Okay, so mental health wise, we have 4 mental health counselors across the district. We initially, when we hired them, we were using ESSER dollars. And we know that it's a need and something we need to maintain in our school district. So we're looking now to move that into our levy dollars. So we have a mental health counselor that's shared between Oak Harbor Intermediate and North Whidbey Middle School. We have one that is shared between Crescent Harbor and Olympic View. And we have one that is serving at Hillcrest. She's there 3 days a week. We also have military family life counselor. We have one at Oak Harbor Intermediate and one that is shared between Crescent Harbor and Olympic View. And so that's where we currently are. And you know, our hope, we have applied for grant dollars to hopefully add to that system across the district.
Salisbury, do you want to talk a little bit about student discipline? So if I'm a student that I have a concern about something, what's the first thing that I do, and how do you see that through, and what are the discipline policies and procedures?
So your first question was what does a student do if they have a concern? There are numerous ways that students can report concerns that they have. They can do it with staff members. We have a number posted at school that they can call, they can leave a message. Anyone from teachers to deans to paraeducators, any staff they can report to. Anything that's brought to our attention will be investigated. And then if we have things that have happened that we can prove happened, then the next thing that we go to is we have school discipline. School discipline is based on school board policy. So you can find it on our website. If you go to school board policy, there is student discipline in there. We are governed by that. The school board policy is also put together from state recommendations and requirements. And so we then implement the discipline per what happened, depends on the offense or the infraction.
We also have HIB, which is the harassment, intimidation, bullying policy. That is a state law. And so a lot of what I'm going to call you Mr. Nate. What Mr. Nate is talking about is our work around following those policies in the Washington Administrative Code. And that keeps changing on us, unfortunately, and we keep trying to stay ahead of it. So we do have to follow that. HIB policy and procedure, you can also report confidentially. So if you're a parent and you have a concern, you can also submit a concern about what it is. And by process of the WAC, we have to follow through step by step with that procedure. And all of those are on our website. I'm going to move to our next slide. Anything else on this one? All right. I'm going to keep you guys moving here. Protection and mitigation. This is one of the things when we think about our step 2 of safety. One of the things that we know, and I am fairly new to the district. I came in July, and as I went around and listened and learned from families, one of the things that was a major concern was, what about these doors? And I know that that's come up in a lot of our questions, is locking doors. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about what that looks like, things that we have done in the past to get to the point that we're at now. So we're in our last step to get to the final mitigation and protection when we think about what we can do for our school facilities. Currently, what we have for school facilities, we had a bond, and on our bond in February, one of the things added from the last February bond to this February bond, we heard from a lot of people the extent of what that front entrance should look like in our last step to get to the secured front entry was a pretty substantial architectural structure component to what we could do with the resources that we had and what we couldn't do. And so we really looked at that. We were hoping for that. In the meantime, it doesn't mean we're going to stop pursuing safety for what a single entry looks like. So I'm going to turn it over to two people who are looking into our next steps for talking about front door safety and single points of entry. So Brian and Tyler, this is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Probably about 10 years ago, we really began in earnest trying to increase the safety of our facilities and getting them built up for safe but safe access. One of the more visible things that you could probably see around town is about 5 years ago, we began doing a perimeter fencing around all but one of our facilities. At this point, we have all but one done, and we have gates, but those gates are controlled each and every day. They are locked during school hours. They're open for our community to access our grounds afterwards, after school hours. But during school hours, those are locked and access is controlled into our facilities. One of the other aspects of safety is human behavior. And so the experts told us that having one single point of entry in our school, the main door, one single point and no other ways to get into the school was the most safe. And so we began locking all of our external doors. So every one of our external doors except that front door, which we use for access, is locked. There's no side doors that are open. We don't prop doors open. And that's a human behavior that we drill on. We keep on the top of the latest techniques and the latest recommendations, but we constantly drill our people. We train new people when new employees come to our district. We train them in the way we do lockdown and lockouts. We are I believe we're very fortunate that we have a very close relationship with our Oak Harbor PD. You can see them here. They've come here tonight to join us and assist us. And so they definitely help us drill. And we are presently now researching technology solutions for electronic access to our buildings, visitor access, and just being able to control that front door. We want to get to the point where we lock that front door and then control that electronically. There are a lot, as you can imagine, there is a lot of companies out there that want to help us out. We're being very thoughtful about it to make sure that we're getting the best deal for our money, and we also want to make sure that this system will work with existing systems we have. Mr. Starkovich will explain a little more about that.
Yeah, so the tools that we're looking at, and there's actually a couple different tools on the market that we've looked into. Many of them are driven on kind of an intercom system where essentially you walk up to the front door, you press a button, you interact with the front office staff, and then they let you in. And so most of the vendors that we've been looking at would be something along those lines. So that's essentially the vendors that we've had come out. We've got another meeting actually this week with one of those vendors where they're going to give us some more information. And so we'll continue to look at the best solution that we can find for that. And it's actually a company that we currently utilize for our security cameras. So right now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but all of our schools currently have security cameras. Over the last 3 years, 3 of our buildings have been upgraded, and we will continue to upgrade those with newer technology. I'm sure you keep hearing AI as kind of the catchphrase, but the newer camera systems are far smarter, where you can actually track movement and actually follow a person from camera to camera to camera to camera, and that's what the newer systems offer us, as well as being cloud-based, so they can be accessed anywhere rather than in one location, as some of the older systems were limited to. The other thing that we are doing, just so you know, from the technology standpoint, we do monitor all student internet activity. Anything that's violence-based, bullying, harassment, that actually does trigger red flags, and those get sent to building staff who then can respond to it. So there is monitoring going with that, and then email monitoring as well. So we do watch and look for keywords and make sure and follow up if there is something that's concerning, and then we do pass that on to the building staff. The other thing that we're in the process of right now is 3 of our buildings, actually starting next week, will be getting intercom upgrades. We had a consultant that actually came in last year, and one of the recommendations that they had was moving to intercom systems that were digitally driven, that would allow for automated messages, so that no one has to sit at a phone and say, we're in lockdown, where instead you can trigger it from any phone in the building, or from a mobile app, or somewhere else. So those are just some of the tools that we're looking at to help secure our buildings.
So much. So I also know that we'll probably have lots of questions at the end about the single entry. What does that really mean structurally, as well as digitally and electronically? And we'll probably want to get to that at the end. So I am going to jump to our next slide. So response time, we have received a lot of questions. One thing I'm most proud about in Oak Harbor, and I've worked in a lot of states and districts, is the collaboration with our law enforcement, but it goes beyond that. It's our medical professionals, our paramedics, our firefighters. It's incredible, the partnership and response. No one questions, they just jump in when there's a call, and it's all hands on deck. And we unfortunately, or fortunately, had an incident a couple weeks ago where we saw that in action. And then we did our debrief together after that in our roundtable exercise. So I want to turn this over to Mr. Lundstrom and to the PD. Could you talk a little bit about what is our response time? What does that look like from a call? And then what happens when you get a call? How does your team jump into that? I'm going to turn it over to our local law enforcement.
Okay, yeah. So really for us, often we get dispatched to the call by somebody calling into our dispatch center. And we often have officers that are on routine patrol in the community, and our response time to most locations is within a couple minutes. Often it could be quicker than that, as seen at the last incident that we had at the school. We were on scene very quickly, and that includes out at Crescent Harbor as well, which is one of our schools that we respond to. So.
I do want to talk a little bit about kind of our collaborating. We've already said it twice. You can see they're actually here, but that is something you can tell we are extremely proud of. A little bit of my personal history. This is the 5th school district I've worked at, and I've never seen a relationship between a school district and a police department as well as one we have. These people have helped us write our safety plans. They collaborate with us on any safety work we do within our schools. Like Tony was saying, Captain Tony was saying, they help us with our drills. They observe our drills. They actually help us. They have keys to our schools, so they have access 24/7. They help us with our drills, and after the drills, we do a debrief, and they will help us speak to our principals and talk about things we can improve on, things that we did really good on, and things that their recommendations. This is one of the examples I just love bringing up all the time is earlier this year, for a good example, we had Oak Harbor Intermediate School and we locked that down within 14 seconds. The entire building was locked down. So that's a result of one, our staff and our students taking it very seriously. That's a result of the police department helping us refine our techniques and refine the way we do these. And it's a result of constant drilling. We have at least 2 drills a year, usually 3. And I encourage our principals to do a drill kind of during a non-traditional time. We can all, 30% of a student's life is not in their classroom. They're a gym, they're in library or something. So I always encourage our principals to kind of mix it up a little bit and try something new.
So, and I'll just add that we are very committed to creating a safe learning environment for the schools, making sure that our students, staff are safe. And with that, we work with fire, EMS, NCIS, which is Naval Criminal Investigative Services in the Navy. And we actually have a training cadre in this community where we go out and we train critical incidents. Part of that's training with the school district. And when there are drills, we get notified of drills that are coming up at different schools. We usually have a representative from that training cadre and then patrol officers that are at those drills to make sure that, one, the drill goes successfully, and we can debrief afterwards, make any adjustments that are needed, and then also make sure that we're following best practices and providing the proper response that needs to happen. So.
I'd like to add that we also have a school resource officer, SRO, that is an actual Oak Harbor police officer. He serves our entire district, but he happens to be headquartered at the high school, has an office at the high school. And in the recent incident, he was there and aware of what was going on and went to the alleged location before I even knew what was going on. The other thing that I want to mention about him and what I've seen with every SRO that we've had is they're very relational with students. They develop strong relationships with our students so that our students interact with them in a way that they trust them and are just comfortable having them around. So a pretty phenomenal resource that we have in our school resource officer.
Yeah, go ahead.
And if I could comment too, so Tyler is our school resource officer and we just got fortunate. Tyler graduated from Oak Harbor High School, so he's a native, and he's got stake here. He knows the school, and he does an outstanding job. And I just wanted to point out that I don't know how many have watched the video from the incident over there in Tennessee. It's on YouTube. I suggest you do if you haven't. It shows what a response should be like. They did, I used to train active shooter, do the training when I was at Wenatchee in my career growing up. I've been in law enforcement 35 years. I got out for 2 years and I actually developed security for Confluence Health, which is a healthcare organization based in Wenatchee. And it's a whole different critter when you're in that environment. It's kind of like being in a school, right? And you got patients and stuff like that. But when you're training for these things, I've never been in one, luckily. I've never been in a shooting, luckily. Been in a lot of other things, but when you're training for them, you think that it'll go like it went in the video you'll see with the Nashville people. Terrible, terrible thing that happened. But as far as the law enforcement response from what I've seen on the video, and I don't know everything, if you want to see what appears to be, assuming the video is accurate, not put together and all that, a good response, that's what they did. And that's what we try to instill upon our people here. Forget the Texas one. We're all aghast by what we saw down there many months ago, but we try to instill in what we want the teachers and the students that have a cognizant ability to, but mostly the teachers and staff to know that that's what we're going to do. So if they're ever in a situation, they know that's what our response is going to be like. And the high school was a prime incident, which was not a real incident, but we didn't know that going in. We had some indicators of things. But I also want to mention too, and why I'm rolling on, we got Skagit calling us right off the bat saying, hey, can we send you deputies? We had Island County send up their detectives from Coopville. We had EMTs in the hospital and our emergency services put helicopters in the air thinking that it was a real incident. And we had our fire department here. We had the school. You just get all these resources that when they believe that there's an incident occurring, that they don't care about anything else other than getting there and trying to help. And we're fortunate in this community on this island. You know, again, we were fortunate in Wenatchee too. When I was there 28 years. I've been here about 7. But we have a good collaborative relationship. We have a good relationship with the school. The school knows what they're doing. Just like the high school, we found nothing but locked doors. And so we're fortunate. It's not only our men and women with the police department and the school, but we got a lot of resources that want to provide help and assist. And I had the FBI call me up, say, hey, we heard there's a shooting up there, and this is somebody down in Seattle. And I said, well, you know, it's not, but, you know, great, thank you. So I just want to make sure you understand that this is a collaborative effort. It's a, I guess, region-wide thing that happens whenever situations like this are potentially occurring or could occur. And we try to train that way too. We train a lot with Skagit County. That's why they offered to help. So just as a point of fact, that's probably my 3 minutes.
Go ahead, Dwight. Did you have something? Yeah, we're ready for the next slide. I do want to hover on this for 1 minute, though. There was lots of questions about what you just answered. So we train for active shooter drills. We train collaboratively. We did a round table again the other day. Our SRO is that conduit between knowing the school. I can't say enough about that. There are questions about only one our SRO. How come not more? And I'd say a lot of that has to do with how close our schools is. Even Crescent Harbor, to get out there, and our Navy, the response is incredible. Is there anything else that from police that you feel you want to address in regards to the response time getting to our schools?
Well, I'll just say that when our SRO isn't on duty or is occupied on something else, our patrol staff picks that up and responds to the school. So it's not just our school resource officer as the only response to the school district. We have all of our resources available. Our detectives will fill in if they need to be, but there's always an entity that will respond. So the last thing is our school resource officer also helps and consults with threat analysis for the school. And I'll tell you, in my time here, my 19 years at the police department, you know, we get those threat or harassment or concerns for school safety at all times, day and night, as a patrol officer. And school staff has always been available to take those phone calls anytime, day or night, and then issue the proper warnings or take the proper action. So.
Great, thank you so much.
One more comment? Don't have time? Okay, I'll be quiet.
Sorry. You and I can take it up later. Okay, so types of emergencies. I want to keep us moving. Lots of confusion is about lockout, lockdown. Lockout is pretty much our students in the hallway they're doing business of school. We're just making sure our front doors are officially locked. And any kids that are outside during that time, when we sense that there's something going on in the community, we bring people in so they can go to the library, they can go within the confines of the building. That's our lockdown, or lockout. Lockdown is when we hunker down. Our kids are trained for both of these drills. Our staff are trained. We met with NAS Whidbey. And so those are the difference between the two. Anything you want to talk about that? You had the microphone ready. No? Oh, go ahead, Dwight.
No, we also practice shelter in place, so that would be in case of an earthquake, which is, you know, a realistic thing in Western Washington. And if you ever hear, one of the things that I often had to try to dispel is you'll hear, if you've ever read about earthquakes and how buildings fall, you'll hear about corners, and what and I'll describe that here in a second, but we coach our kids that in an earthquake drill, you get under furniture so that your head is protected from falling objects. And you'll hear some places talk about this idea of getting where triangles are formed or corners. Though that is how you would do it if you were in a developing country where they don't have the same building codes as we do. We have building codes that are much more stringent, and so that's why we use tables and objects like that. And then evacuation, that's in case of a fire. I don't think a school has had a fire-related injury or death since 1952, if my stats are correct. So evacuation often happens if in case, and I've gotten to experience those. I think Mr. Jackson has gotten to experience bomb threats with me. And so we search the field that we're evacuating to, and then we evacuate the building and have the building searched. And then this leads back into the amount of support we have here. The Navy shows up with its EOD dogs, and we have State Patrol usually shows up, and Oak Harbor Police Department and the Fire Department also. So we get lots of help when we have those kinds of incidents, and hopefully never will one of those be real. So that's kind of how those go.
Anything else on this, Brian, from your aspect you want to touch on?
No, Michelle, you summed it up really well. We like to be simple. When you're in an emergency, a simple 2 words, you only got to learn 2 words, lockdown and lockout. There was some schools, not in our district, but they'll have different titles for a lockdown, different titles for a lockout. That's great, but we tried to make it as simple as possible. We have transitional employees that go from one school to another, and we want to make sure that a lockdown in Crescent Harbor is exact same as a lockdown in the high school. So the consistency and the drilling the same way, using the consistent language is important to us.
One of the things that we also allow is any one of our staff members to call it. We're never going to question them. When they're making a safety decision about our students, they don't have permission for that. They don't need our permission for that. That we're going to trust them to make the call. Perfect example was when we had a teacher on the playground with kids outside at one of our elementary schools and saw somebody carrying a concealed carry, but didn't have a shirt on, so it wasn't really concealed. And that she went into action, called a lockdown for that building, and we want our employees to do that because safety of our kids is number one. We never want them to question that. And then we can always go to a lockout, but a lockdown is our most extreme, and then if we have to ease up a little bit. One of the things we did learn from our DPAC when we met with our family members was really helping to educate this a little bit more to our community. So while we know it and the language really well, how do we continue to allow that education in our community of those 2 terms? Because what we're finding is there's confusion about those terms. So suddenly social media picks up where all these schools are on lockdown, or why didn't all schools go on lockdown? And a lot of these times, if a teacher calls it, or a staff member or a guest teacher in our building calls it, we're going to deal with it right away and come in and get all the support that systems they need, and then look at the proximity of that call. So for example, if the high school is on a lockdown, we're not going to lock down every school. If we feel a lockdown is imminent to that campus, we're not going to call it for other schools. And so 911 sometimes calls it for us, police sometimes call it, staff call it, and we always go to the extreme, and then we can ease up on that. Anything else on that?
Oftentimes we get guidance from any one of these 3 are the ones that typically call us on which schools that we're locking down or doing a lockout with. So if there's a threat immediately, for instance, near the high school, we'll just keep using the high school since Nate's here, and they will make the call on whether Hillcrest and Broadview need to either do a lockout or a lockdown or nothing at all, depending on what the threat is, because they have a lot more information than we do. And then the unfortunate thing is then social media lights up and everyone in the community thinks they know more than the people that are directly involved. So that's always an interesting dynamic for us.
All right, thank you. I'm going to move to our next slide because Mr. Lundstrom, you read my mind. So talking about communication, it's imperative to us. So when we know something, we give you the information we know at hand. We don't keep that from you. We also don't want to put false information out there. So we're very calculated about what goes out and when it goes out. And sometimes we have people frustrated that you just repeated the same information. But if we don't say anything for an hour and we're still in the middle of trying to figure it out, we're keeping our kids safe, we're keeping in a lockdown, and we might not have any new information, but every few minutes we're going to keep saying, we're still in a lockdown. The police are on site. We're investigating. And that's the thing that I'm going to, as a parent, I'm going to really ask for your help as a partner in this tonight. Because one of the things that we learned, especially from the high school situation, we knew almost immediately it wasn't, we treated it seriously, but we had other information that wasn't available to the community to know that we trust our police. We trust they're going to go through and be methodical about their sweeps. And we're talking the football field, every bleacher in the stadium, trash cans, restrooms, every space needs to be covered. And that takes time to do that. In the meantime, unfortunately, we have kids with these things, right? And so the first thing they do is they say, I think there's something happening. And the teachers will say, we're in a lockdown, we're letting the police do their thing. I need you to be quiet. And sometimes this is our best friend and our worst enemy. And so what happens is the story gets kind of glorified before we actually have the details of that. So one of the things we know that we need to do a better job of is, when this would happen, I was an administrator and my kids were in a school with me and I knew what was going on, but I wasn't texting my kid to let them know that because I was busy protecting other kids. So our family dynamic was text me once, tell me you're okay and you're in a lockdown, and then I don't want you to continue to text. Shut the phone off. We don't, especially if we're in a lockdown and there is an active shooter in the building, we don't want our phones on and pinging because they know where you are. And so we tell the kids, keep the phone silent. You can tell your families you're okay. We're in a lockdown. We are fine. We're letting the police deal with it. So that's our communication thing that we are asking to partner with. How do we help do that for students so they feel safe? And how do we keep parents informed with the information that we have? And sometimes we might not have that information for 10, 15, 30 minutes, but we're going to give you what we know when we know it. And I know on that one, Chief Dresker and I were every 10 minutes talking. And so we were talking as an incident command center here with the police who were actually on the scene there. We have lots of different ways in how we communicate. We've also learned from families, sometimes if you stop receiving our text messages, then when there's an event, you're not going to receive a text messages. So you have to check your settings, but you always receive an email. So our initial communication, you can see on the top, this is all the different ways we communicate. So you get to sign up for your preference, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk more deeply about what that looks like.
Yeah, so our current modes of communication to families during an emergency, we really prioritize making sure that we send out timely, consistent information during emergency. It's a really stressful time for our families, and they want to know that they're being informed and not finding out things on social media. And so we really try to be good about sharing what we can and as quickly as we can. Our initial communication will come via text message, email. We'll also put it on our websites and then also on our social media feeds. And there are sometimes families opt out of getting text messages. We are going to be rolling out a new platform next year that'll make it a little more streamlined for emergency communications that we'll share more about later. But this is our current way that we communicate. And then, as Michelle said, every 15 minutes, we share more information out to families, regardless if we have an update or not, just so that families know that we're still, the thing is still happening and we are still providing consistent communication. And once it's concluded, we kind of usually send a wrap-up message and provide any resources or additional information for families or staff or students that might need it.
If you do have your child texting you during it, just let them know you care about them and let them know that they're going to be safe, they're in good hands. We have law enforcement on site and we're there to help them. The other thing is, a couple things that we put in here is just don't rush to the school. That's the biggest thing that we ask is we're taking care of it, but we have to keep the scene clear whenever that happens. And we know it's hard for kids, especially our littles, and our staff do such a good job of keeping them entertained and safe and quiet and calm. And we train our teachers for that. We train our substitutes for that. So I wish we wouldn't have to do that. I wish we wouldn't have to have these lockdowns, but I'd rather have a lockdown to keep us safe and respond to it immediately. So just as we come into the ending of the presentation, then we'll open up for questions. A lot of these questions you've been addressing as we go. So thank you for our panelists who didn't know that answering your questions. But let's talk a little bit about recovery. How do we regroup? What does a recovery look like in our district? And who's in charge of that? So how do you debrief and how do you recover from that?
So if we were to have to evacuate a campus, we have reunification sites across the community of Oak Harbor. And so we would work with the police department so that not only would they secure the school site so parents, you couldn't get close to the school site, we would also have rallied our buses so that we can load kids and move them to a reunification site. We have numerous ones already arranged. Brian Hunt and I have worked on that. We have a couple to-go boxes that I can throw in the back of my rig and show up with space blankets and some other items if we have to be outside to keep kids warm. And then we have a reunification plan. So when we get there, we can get parents linked up with their students. And then the other part of a recovery is the aftermath. So if there was something tragic that happened in such an event, Then we also have a crisis plan where we prepare with our counseling staff and our school administrators to have a crisis plan in place at school so that we have people available for counseling, to answer questions, and to communicate with you guys, the community, about the details of sorry, I got a question to read here. The details of the event and how to best serve our kids. So we have, like I said, we have 4 mental health counselors that we can rally to a school along with our school counselors, and they fill in where they're needed. And then they set up different scenarios or spaces within a school so kids have a place to go, and they all have training on this. So and it can last anywhere from a few days to a few months to work through this with kids, because recovering from events like this, hopefully we'll never have to do it, but even when we recover from student death in our community, it takes a while, depending on the connectedness of the student and kind of the impact that they may have. Anything else on that, Nate? You've had a couple this year.
No, I would just add that we have unfortunately had, because of student deaths, have had some experience with this. And I can attest to, we have teams that are ready, that know what to do. They do a good job. One of the great things that I've seen is the way that our counseling staff across the district work together. And so if something happens at one school, it's not just one school that is reacting and dealing with that. The resources from all the other schools go to that school to help out and assist with whatever we need. And that just one of the great things about the community we have.
The question I'm holding is specific to, did we have any counseling available after the swatting incident? And I guess, Nate,
We didn't have, we always have counseling available, and we are fortunate to have a full-time mental health counselor on site at the high school. We did not have a lot of students utilize that, but we do have that available.
All right, so we have a few more questions that came in that we didn't address. So I'm going to go through those quickly, and I'm going to open it up to anyone in the panel that might want to take a stab at it. So the most questions have to do with doors, locking doors. So all of our classrooms lock, but talk a little bit, and this is probably Brian, and maybe from the police perspective. You know, we've worked with the person who worked with the Texas incident, came out and assessed our schools. We don't have currently right now our front doors that are locked 24/7. Can you explain a little bit about that process moving forward? What does that look like?
I can. Mr. Starkovich and I are looking into a system that will keep those doors locked all the time. Right now, as we speak, we have electronic locks. And so if we have an impending lockdown, the office staff has a remote control and they can lock their door very quickly. That's what we have now. But what we want to do is keep that door perpetually locked, only opened when someone we allow into our schools can come in. So that's the way we're working. We have, that's the direction we're working. Like we were saying earlier, we want to be very thoughtful and make sure we're getting the right stuff, make sure we don't get ripped off, make sure we get a good value for our money, and make sure that this new system is going to work with some existing systems we have. PA system can go into that. The existing lock, maybe we can use that. And so there's a lot of companies out there that want to sell you things, and we want to just be very thoughtful with our money on that community's money.
Thank you. Law enforcement, this one might be for you. There's a couple questions about this, so I'll try to put them together. How often do you use schools to train to be ready for emergencies? How often do you partner with the Navy and the school for that? And then what are your thoughts on K-9 units coming into the schools? And this is more for our personnel. We've kind of already figured that out from our attorney. K-9 checks for drug searches. So we'll start with those first two questions with the law enforcement.
I can help out with that a little bit, Michelle. Our police officers police officers and first responders, so this includes medical staff and fire department, have trained in each and every one of our schools. We do a drill during, many times during breaks, like spring break, Christmas break, we have our ROTC students help us be role players. You know, they might play a victim or maybe a shooter or something. And so we do very intense drilling with the police department in our schools when they're available. I think they've been to every one of our schools. I think the more the individual officer knows the interior of our schools, I think that's better if there's ever a situation. So they are invited anytime to come and drill in our schools, and they take advantage of that, and they do.
So just from law enforcement, a quick comment. So we do work with the Navy. Navy does quarterly drills. We don't necessarily do it quarterly, but we work with them pretty heavily, along with the schools. And then I'm going to ask Captain Slowick to briefly talk about the key issue with what he feels comfortable. Then Captain Bailey, who used to be a canine handler. We don't have dogs here, but maybe he can address that. So Captain Slowick.
Yeah, so just like Chief Dresker said, we do training often with the schools. We respond to all the school drills, and our sergeants perform continued training with our officers, in-service training with our officers. And we actually have a SWAT officer on each of our patrol squads that helps for our tactics and things like that. As for the keys, we have keys for all the schools. And those keys are used to be able to get into the school buildings, or the classrooms, whatnot. The school has a protocol for keeping classrooms locked and getting, when lockouts or lockdowns happen, they have a protocol for putting those classrooms in a locked condition, and then we can access those as needed depending on the situation.
Mike?
Yeah, so it's been a while since I was a canine officer. I used to be a patrol canine that would do tracks, and then I brought our first and only drug dog. Yoda was my dog back in 2003, I think it was, 2004, somewhere around there, a long time, 20 years ago. I can tell you that I did used to train at the high school back then in lockers and stuff like that, but that was 20 years ago. Today, laws have changed tremendously. So doing dog sniffs in schools and stuff like that just doesn't happen. And drug dogs in general. The Navy base, they don't come on into the city. I don't even know, to be honest with you, how many drug dogs they currently have. A lot of them are bomb dogs. Oh, 2? Okay. A lot of them I know are bomb dogs. So that's why.
May I just clarify real quick that you've talked about training in the schools, but I want to add that every time we do, I can't think of a lockdown training we've done at the high school that we didn't have multiple law enforcement there with us as we're training as a staff and as a school. So want to make sure you're aware of that.
Do you want to talk about what our attorney said
Yeah,
about truck
so
dogs?
this question came up through our district parent advisory committee. And so I talked to our legal counsel. And the thing that you need to understand with school discipline is it requires reasonable suspicion for us to search a student. So we have places in a school that students can reasonably believe are not private to them. So lockers, their desk spaces, locker rooms. So we could search those with a dog, but we can't directly search students unless we have reasonable suspicion. So we would end up in a situation if we brought drug dogs in where a student may feel entrapped or searched without reasonable suspicion. So that's the reason that we don't have drug dogs searching our schools.
Let's talk a little bit while we're on the topic. Drugs has come up. Talk a little bit. I'd like to hear from law enforcement. I know your laws have changed in what you can and can't do, as well as schools. Have you seen an uptick in our community? Our school administrators, are you seeing an uptick? Talk to me a little bit about that and what our collaborative approach is for reducing the impact of drugs in this community, including school community.
Well, I'll quickly say, if you're not aware of the legislation, the state legislators who are in session right now and some of the changes that have occurred over the past couple of years, you might kind of Google it. They're right now in session, and they're trying to determine whether cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, some of those things are going to be illegal or not, which right now they kind of are and kind of aren't. Now for juveniles, it's not faltered tremendously, but there's a lot of bills going through right now we're prohibited from talking to kids under most circumstances when it's a custodial arrest right now. We don't do that at the schools under most circumstances now because of state law. So there's a lot of changes, and I know we're limited on time, so I won't go into all of them, but some of it's been in the newspaper. They're right now deciding some of that along with pursuit bills. They're deciding some other stuff with contacts with kids. And I understand that there's a protection factor for juveniles and there's some for rehabilitation, but some people, sometimes things just have to happen and there needs to be a carrot and a stick, in my opinion. And you need to figure out that balance, and that's being in a political arena right now. So we are more limited on what we can do, not only in the schools, but everywhere else, cut it off there.
We've talked at the high school. We have a intervention prevention specialist, a counselor, and I know there's a huge need. Mr. Peters, you and I have talked about intervention prevention specialists at the middle school and some of the kids, especially COVID, picking up some habits. Do you want to talk about what you and your team have been doing?
Well, we've seen, I don't know, it's considerable uptick in vape use and marijuana dab pens, alcohol use. So, we interact with those students. When we hear something's happening, we obviously go and check things out. You've seen some of the incidents reported in news recently because something has happened that, somebody's got busted with something and, somebody snitched on them and all of a sudden they've said something outrageous to get themselves in trouble. I've contacted the high school to ask for some support for that. And Michelle and I've spoken to see if we couldn't get some ESD support at North Whidbey Middle School to come and do some more training with our students. The amount that we get in and talk with kids is, informative, but if we had somebody there that was a specialist, I think it would really help our kids understand and our community know that we're really care about, what's happening to keep our school safe from drugs and alcohol.
We continue to have more questions about single point of entry, so we'll talk a little bit about it. I'll try to summarize. We did have this as a huge financial investment on the bond. We do not have that financial investment to do the upgrades we want to do with the structure for the single point of entry. We do have at all of our schools single points of entry already. So Mr. Hunt talked earlier about the fencing. We've talked earlier about all doors locked. But what I want to talk about is our next layer is really looking at a cost analysis of what we can afford without the bond to do the next layer. And that is keeping doors locked. Some people have asked about metal detectors in some of our questions. I can tell you back 30 years ago, I started teaching in New York. We did have metal detectors and they went off on me all the time. I swear I'm not armed. And you needed people full-time manning metal detectors and they were not effective. I can tell you that right now. And they still to this day are not effective. We've seen from the airport security recently some things that have got through. So I want to turn it over to Mr. Lundstrom. What would be the next steps for us cost effectively that we would be looking at for our next layer for we have single point of entry. What does that look like?
Well,
if the doors are locked?
so I'm going to use an analogy of our fences right now. So Mr. Hunt has been working on fences throughout the district throughout the past 5 years. When any of us, I'm assuming we buy cars on payments. We don't go pay for the whole car all at once. And so across our district, to pay for fences, we've had to do it over the years because it's a large expense and we have a lot of other things going on in our district. I think the high school is up for new fences here in the not too distant future. The fences that we put up during the initial remodel weren't quite to the standard we would like to have them currently. So it takes us time because we have paced revenue just like all of us do in our daily budget. So with that being said, depending on what the costs are, and I know Mr. Starkovich and Mr. Hunt are getting a second visit from the company Verkada this week actually to get more of a price point of what this is going to cost. So we're still trying to figure out. And then once we get there, And our different schools are going to have different levels of need because of the way they were designed. So if you take Hillcrest and the high school as example, the high school may not need a camera system. It'll just need a good click-in system because the front receptionist will be able to see the front door. But if you go to a school like Broadview or I'll use Oak Harbor Elementary, the offices can't see the front doors. So they're going to need a full-on camera system and quite a bit more electronics to be able to manage this. So, and these are technologies that are just becoming available to us and that are effective. So more often than not, when you get on the front end of this, it's kind of expensive. So I don't want to answer how fast we can do it because we may not be able to afford it except on the payment plan over a series of a couple of years.
I know with two of our schools that were on the bond and adding the third, there was some questions about how bonds are funded. So we don't go out for a bond every year, right? This is a 25-year investment of a community into these long-term projects. So it's going to take a long-term investment, years after years after years of saving up to do what we really think needs to be done. But in the meantime, we have to figure it out together as a community. So security, we won't be able to do the infrastructure for it, but we can work our way toward it. The other thing is portables. There's been some questions about portables. So when we have lockdowns, how many of you are parents with kids sitting in a portable during a lockdown? It's hard for those kids where we don't have bathroom facilities. They need to stay in a trailer. They're putting a portable because it's a temporary classroom. It's not a permanent fixture of a building. So we have a lot of our enough students to pull from portables to put in a brand new elementary school of its own. So in the meantime, those kids are sitting in a portable during a lockdown, and we really tried to release the lockdown working with law enforcement as soon as we can. But, you know, we saw from some of our most recent lockdowns, sometimes kids are in a portable for over an hour or 2 hours in that portable with no restrooms. And so we try the best we can with what we have, and we'll continue to work and chip away at one school at a time to get to where we need to be for this community.
So just so you're aware, all of our portables are outfitted with a water cooler. And I don't think the kids stand around it and gossip, but they all have a water cooler so that they have water available to them throughout the day. And then all of our portables are also fitted with they have a bucket, and they have a camp tent for the bucket so that if they have to go use the restroom, they can have a thin wall that nobody will see them, but they might be able to hear them in their ability to use the restroom. So,
And I'm looking at Miss Merritt and Pat back there that I know I've heard from the elementary schools that when one student has to use the restroom during a lockdown, they all have to use the restroom. One thing I do want to talk about, it's our last question we didn't get to. We got to pretty much all of them. And I'm going to give this one to our local law enforcement because they might have a good idea. Talk to us about how we identify safe crosswalks as a community. What is the partnership with the city to identify safer walking routes?
All right, I'll take that. So there are safe routes to school grants. The city has partnered with the school district in getting flashing school zone signs, also flashing crosswalks. And that also really just depends on the amount of grant funding that's out there, what the need is based off of traffic studies. And the city engineering department does those traffic studies for us to determine, where the funds should be going to. A lot of that comes from the community and where they feel like there might be some concerns. And so that community input is very valid.
And I'll just add, the city has a traffic calming process, which is Public Works, Police Department, and others. And so I think the last significant one we did was up on, I can't even think of the street. It's right up here where we put the one in, and that came from parents expressing concern. There was a traffic calming process done on it. They did some studies on it, and then the crosswalk became a reality. So it's looking at all those impacts. I know the city's looking right now at some speed limits. Do they want to reduce or not in the city? What impact does that have on traffic safety and on pedestrian safety, which also obviously includes safety for kids going to school and stuff. So, it's a process. It's a collaborative effort between the city, I think, the parents and the schools. and it's constantly in progress. Sometimes things work a little slower maybe than some want, but you know, they can be fairly expensive. Not too expensive for our kids, right? But it's a matter of looking at it and making sure that's the resolution, right? Is a crosswalk the resolution or is something else resolution? So you have to look at all of that.
Great, thank you. I have one last question, and there's 3 of them, so I themed it. And it's for you, Tyler. You ready? So the question is around Chromebooks, and I think we're going to finish this on time. But how do we look at helping students to be responsible and helping parents in that partnership? In particular, do you have the opportunity to shut down Chromebooks remotely? And how do you monitor Chromebooks, including emails outside of the school day?
No pressure there. So obviously we've got our Common Sense Media, which is the lesson plans that our teachers use in the classroom. So that's being instructed throughout the school year by the students' regular classroom teachers. So that's obviously one thing to help them attempt to keep safe in their usage of it. In terms of shutting down devices, typically if there is a major concern, there are ways to do that. We don't like to fall back to that primarily because a lot of our teachers do use resources online, and if students are taking devices home and they're using them for homework, it becomes a barrier for them to be able to complete their homework tasks. If that's of concern to a parent, I think that's something to definitely bring up with the building principal, and then they can escalate and have a conversation with me, and we can work on possible solutions to resolve that. But at the moment, we're not currently shutting down machines, I think, at night or to address any kind of concerns like that. I think, okay. I wasn't sure if there was another one I missed in there.
Oh, you did great on that one. Thank you. I just want to say our primary role here in this room, not just with the panel, is our kids' safety. And like I started this conversation tonight about, it's emotional safety, body safety, physical safety. And when we think about drugs and alcohol or a community for our structural safety, it takes a community to do that. So again, we thank you so much for being here. We're around for a little bit. But again, it takes a community to keep our kids safe. So we want to thank you for partnering with us to make sure our students have what they need to be successful. And I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for being here tonight. So how about a huge round of applause for putting them on the spot, huh? Thank you so much.
And I've got to leave, but my captains can stay for 5 hours if anybody wants to talk to them. So.